Hey friends, welcome to the Empowered Homes Podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to grow strong families by connecting church and home. We're in studio, Meghan. You need your mic.
I need a microphone. We are a mess today.
A mess today.
A mess.
We just filmed an amazing interview, which we're about to play here in a second. But Meghan, tell us what's been going on this morning.
My goodness. Well, this interview got rescheduled because Microsoft shut down the whole world. And so I couldn't get back. And so we had to reschedule. So we rescheduled for this particular day. I know this is dating our recording date, but we rescheduled for this day. And then we come into the studio and the door starts having problems.
Yeah.
And I got locked out first.
Yeah.
And then
we got you in.
Yeah. Then I got back in, but our technician, John, got locked out.
Yeah.
And so we were on our own.
Yeah, we were sitting in the studio going, what do we do? So we just hit record and said, Lord, we trust you. I don't know. We're locked in. It took us about 30 minutes to get the door open.
We were stuck.
Here. We were stuck in here. We have a little window and everybody's watching us like we're zoo animals stuck in our podcast studio.
And it's really hot in the studio.
It's super hot. So anyways, we had a fantastic interview, and even with you missing the flight and the issues there and Microsoft, and then this morning the chaos of stuff not working, there was a moment where I couldn't get the door open, had to hit record because our guest, we really wanted to interview her.
Yes.
And I had a moment of like, okay, Lord, like the enemy doesn't want this to happen. So I trust you. And we had a fantastic interview. Tell who did we talk to this morning?
Yeah, so our guest was Natalie Runion, and she's written a book, Raised to Stay, and she has a new book coming out, The House That Jesus Built. And she's talking a lot about deconstruction and church hurt and her community that on her platform, her Instagram platform is called Raised to Stay. And she's really talking about staying with Jesus, even in the midst of the messiness that church can be. And whether you're a church staff member or you're a church member who has experienced hurt, her message that God has given her is, we were raised to stay in the church. Like the church was built for a reason, and the local church matters. And there are healthy local churches, and there are reasons to stay connected to the body of Christ. And so it was such a good conversation, because I think that, the stigma around the word deconstruction is just that we kind of walk away from faith and church. And I understand in some ways why people do that, but I love that the healthy conversation that she's having, the greater conversation, is that we are deconstructing to rebuild, and that foundation is Jesus. And so that's what I think made it so good. Yeah,
it was a good interview, but really like just the content and conversation of like, we're people. People hurt people. Hurt people. There's all the things, but the reality is the house that Jesus built, like the church founded on the gospel, is a place of healing, of growth, and not to take this hot topic, cultural topic or phrase of deconstruction and use that as an excuse to just run away or throw everything out. She's really challenged us, like, okay, if you're in that boat of deconstruction or have hurt, there is a pathway back to understanding, and there's churches that are going to walk with you. There's a way for us to let the gospel be the compass and guide for our lives, because Jesus built it.
That's right.
Not human hands. Jesus built it. So fantastic interview.
Yes. Well, and okay, so two things I want people to listen for. She talks about the three little pigs.
Yeah, really
which was so good. And then she talks about the wheel of favor that we learned about.
Good.
Yes. Yeah. So there's some really good nuggets in there that you got to listen for.
And I say it, wheel of favor. So listen to those things. Y'all be blessed by Natalie Runion. Natalie Runion, welcome to Empowered Homes Podcast. We're so glad to have you here with us.
Oh, you guys, thanks for having me. It's good to meet you all.
So, Natalie, you're author. You've been in church leadership. You've done a lot of great things. To our audience, please tell us who you are, what you do. Tell us about your family, all that good stuff.
Well, I'm a pastor's kid, grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and lived in church parsonages and spent all of my life in the church. I have a sister who is 3 years younger than me. And I grew up kind of in an unconventional pastor's home, and that my dad had been saved in his early 20s from a life of drugs and alcohol, and really began our ministry as a family doing soup kitchens and taking blankets down to the park where my dad used to do drugs with the people that we were ministering to, and prisons and nursing homes. It was very boots on the ground type of ministry. And then as my dad grew, there were churches that wanted him to start preaching. And so he went through some programs and got his internship license. And so we started pastoring very small churches right out of the gate, where it was all hands on deck. You know, you've got 5 people that pretty much do everything. And we really learned to fall in love with the people of our churches before we fell in love with positions or titles. And, you know, we were just glad that we got to do what we did for the church. And we got pretty hurt my senior year of high school. My dad was pastoring as an associate pastor, one of the largest churches that he had in his career. And that church really hurt us. And that changed my life. I went from wanting to go to a Christian college and be a youth pastor to now pursuing a science major at a public university, where I wrestled with my faith and my relationship with God, probably for the first time in my life as an 18-year-old, which is a pretty formative age to start wrestling with your faith. And I had a Jewish roommate, and I was in a science major, so I had a lot of atheist professors and really had to fight for my faith. And thankfully, a ministry called Campus Crusade for Christ was on the campus, and I started leading worship and fell back in love with a Jesus that I needed to get to know. And I think that in hindsight, I look back on it and I realized that God had really just done me a favor by allowing me to go through those desert years, fighting for my faith away from the safety of a sanctuary. I ended up majoring in kinesiology, exercise physiology, became a teacher, but you know, you can run what you can't hide. I was leading worship at the same time. And at 33 years old, had the opportunity to retire from teaching altogether and start into full-time ministry, where I was able to provide as a job. And that was kind of the first time that ministry was a vocation for me. And that has become the last 10 years of my life, has really been adult ministry without the safety of my parents, without being the pastor's kid, going through some of the biggest church hurt of my life just in the last 10 years. And watching my friends walk away from the faith who grew up with me in the exact same background I grew up in, and really grieving this loss of my generation, of other generations. And that has prompted me to start this ministry called Raised to Stay. My husband and I have been married for 17 years. We have 2 daughters who are 12 and almost 16. And we're raising our own stayers. So don't ask me for parenting advice. I'll have to raise mine first, and then I'll let you know how it goes. But we live here in Kentucky, and I literally just do what I can to help churches heal, to help people who have walked out deep hurt, pastors' kids, pastors, leaders, congregants, and just say, okay, yes, we've been hurt. Yes, there's been obviously this deconstruction movement, but we are all called to stay with Jesus. And that's really been my heart over the last several years, has just been reminding people that we're going to be disappointed by humans, but God is the one who doesn't change, and that we can hold on to him and also wrestle with his people.
Yeah, that's awesome. And, you know, I picked up your first book and just finished it. And, you know, I know that God, when you say you can run, but you can't hide. And so when he's calling you back into this, and you started this online platform, and that's sort of catapulted into writing books. And we're going to talk about your new book in a little bit, but just first, you know, talking about Raised to Stay. And I know that it's powerfully resonated with me and many other people. And so can you just talk a little bit about how that book's impact has influenced your ministry going forward?
Yeah, you know, the Raised to Stay Instagram account started in 2019, when I was at a season that most people thought was the height of my ministry career. I was at a mega church. People thought I was doing what I wanted to be doing, but it was actually in a season where I was under a very narcissistic, toxic leader. I was not healthy spiritually, emotionally. And I went on a walk with the Lord and was like, you know, I have a degree where I can make a lot of money. Why am I still doing this? Like, if anything, just let me work at Starbucks. Like, I don't want to do this. And the Instagram account came about because as I was walking with the Lord that day and telling him that, I literally in my brain saw the words like raised to stay, like a teleprompter go across my brain. And I had no idea what that meant. I just knew that even in a barren season, God must still be producing good fruit, because there was something in me that still had a little bit of hope that I didn't have to quit. And so I went home and I wrote my first black box. The church did not hurt you. A few broken people did. Don't give up. You were raised to stay. Now, in hindsight, the church is made up of people. So I've learned a lot in the 5 years that I've been doing this ministry. I probably would have worded that different, because people do hurt us. But my point was, don't let a few people keep you from God's promises. That was my hope. And so every day I would write these black boxes, just trying to convince myself not to quit. I had like 100 people that were part of this. And before I knew it, we became an army, and we're like 173,000 strong now of people that I call the stayers. And the book came about because a publisher saw them on Instagram, and a publisher believed in my little 1,200 follower family and said, let's write a book. And so that's really how it all started. And I'm in awe of how this book has helped people heal, give language to our pain, to not just stay stuck in it, but to look for the hope and the holy, even though we've gone through the hurt and the hard. And that's really my heart for all of us, is that we would find our healer on the other side of the pain.
It's so good. You can run, but you can't hide. So Megan's read your first book, and it's just been incredible. We've been talking about it, the last couple of weeks. It's been amazing. But today specifically, I want to talk about your new book. It's about to come out September 3rd, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, your new book is called The House That Jesus Built, Leading Our Churches Back to God's Original Blueprint. So just give us a little synopsis, and how does this new title build off the message of the previous book, Raised to Stay?
It's interesting because your sophomore book, your second book, can sometimes be completely different from your first book. And I knew Raised to Stay had struck a chord, and we couldn't leave people in the rubble, right? We can talk about deconstruction, but anytime in scriptures that God asks his people to tear something down, there's always a rebuilding process. And so I thought, what would it look like if we as believers were like, okay, fine, like we got rid of all of the religion, we've detangled from the stuff that people placed on us, we've done the deconstruction work without without completely destroying our faith. What would that look like to build? And I started reading the story of the 3 little pigs. And I didn't realize this, but there's actually a moral to the story of the 3 little pigs, which I found fascinating, in that these 3 pigs were tasked to build homes to protect their communities from the big bad wolf, who was going to come and huff and puff and blow their house down. And the first pig built fast and built with straw. The next one built with sticks. And then the third one is the one who built with the bricks. And I said, okay, well, that's fine. We all know that story, but what's the moral? And the moral of the story is that the first 2 little pigs were in a hurry to go play with their friends. They built fast and they built sloppy. And it made room for the enemy to be able to come in and to tear down their homes, where the one that built with brick knew that he needed to take his time, use all the right materials to make sure that it could withstand the hot air of the enemy. And I thought about, for a lot of us, we have been part of ministries, of churches that we thought we were partnering with really strong leaders who were building kingdom, but they were really just building castles because they wanted to play. They wanted the social media following. They wanted to have the big church. They wanted to get famous. And so we ended up partnering with people rather than partnering with God. And that's where a lot of the church hurt has come from. So immediately that title, The House That Jesus Built, felt in my mind like such a beautiful second book to say, okay, we've torn it down, but let's rebuild it, but not alone, with Jesus and with each other.
Powerful illustration of. I didn't know that story had a moral too, but I think a lot of times we tear things down with no even blueprint, no plan, no idea of rebuilding. And so I love the purpose of it. Like, there's no deconstruction without reconstruction. And so the book is just phenomenal. It's going to be a powerful resource specifically to ministry leaders who we work with. We have countless ministry leaders a part of Empowered Homes that we got to get this book in their hands. It's amazing. Megan?
Yeah, well, and I think about the disorienting nature of wrestling with faith and deconstruction, and when there's been true, genuine hurt, and there tends to be division and sides taken, and it's so disorienting. And I think ultimately at the root, people want to come to a place where they're seeking Jesus. But when you're so disoriented and the enemy comes in, like you said, and wants to blow your house down, you're just like, okay, what do I do? You know? And so just practically speaking, how can someone faithfully stay and serve in the local church, even if they've experienced church hurt, or they've watched people walk away, or they're seeing some things in church leadership that they're questioning, they're not sure what to do? Like, how can they faithfully stay if it's not feeling healthy?
Yeah, I always tell people who have walked out a really challenging season at an unhealthy church that sometimes in order to stay, we have to go. In order for us to preserve our innocence and the purity of our hearts, we have to take a season where we say, I'm not going to leave, I'm going to go. I can't stay in this toxic environment because my soil is too precious to allow my roots to die on the vine, because leaders refuse to address abuse or biblical teaching or whatever it is that might be lacking in an unhealthy church. And I want to encourage everybody listening that there are more healthy churches than unhealthy churches. There are more good shepherds than bad shepherds. But when you've been deeply wounded by a church community or a shepherd, it feels like all churches are bad and all leaders are going to do this. And that's Satan's language. You have to remember that Satan has been trying to divorce the family of God since the garden. He has used Pharaoh to try to kill all of the babies so that the Israelites would outnumber the Egyptians. I mean, we could go throughout scriptures and see where the enemy has no new tactics. And so we have to get mad at the real enemy here and say, okay, yes, that church hurt me, that leader was abusive, but I am not going to sympathize with the devil that all churches are going to hurt me and all leaders are narcissistic. I'm going to do the hard and holy work of going to counseling, of finding spiritual direction, of getting the healing that I need, whether that be through different means of medication or whatever needs to happen so that we don't lose more pastors to suicide. We're not losing more people to depression and anxiety, but getting all of the help that we can so that then when we step into a new community, when we're ready for that new community, then we are seeing and discerning, oh, this is a healthy shepherd. It's not perfect. This foundation isn't perfect, but I'm safe here. And I think that's what a lot of people are looking for, is they're asking, am I safe here? Not, is it perfect? Not, does it meet every need that I have? But can I sin here and still be loved? Can I fall and still be loved? Can my kids wrestle through seasons and we still have a community? And that's what I would just tell people, like, you have to contend for that. That's something you can't just, get on Google and search for Google reviews and hope you land on one. You've got to go and walk into the church doors and let that discernment that the Holy Spirit has given you help guide you in saying, is this a place I'd want to come back to next week? Am I safe? And shepherds, that's what I just want to say to you. That's what the sheep are asking. They're not asking, how famous are you? How much are your tithes that you're coming in? What they're asking, what are you doing for your cities? What are you doing for your communities? And am I safe to be who God created me to be in this space?
Man, as I'm listening to you and you talk about the those hurting and those woundings, I think for us, we have a phrase we use all the time, the curse of knowledge. I know exactly what you're talking about, like a wounding. I've experienced things as a ministry leader for 20 years. I know exactly what you're saying. But can you give us, like, a listener who's going, what is she talking? Like, how is someone wounded? Just on a base level of what a simple wound could look like and how it can manifest into so much more.
Well, let's take, for example, let's say you have a daughter who gets pregnant and she's not married. And that church has been your family your whole life. And you walk in and you have to tell them, hey, my daughter is pregnant. We need some help. And the first thing they do is tell you, actually, she's married out of wedlock. That's sin. We can do nothing for you. Or if it's not, we can do nothing for you. We don't want to celebrate this. We're going to keep it hidden. We're going to make a big to-do out of it and make sure everybody knows all of the details. And so an entire family can be ruined when the church has been given an opportunity to be the church. That's one example. Second example is a staffing situation where somebody on staff goes to a staff leader and says, I'm worried about this leader. I'm concerned that they're not healthy. I feel like every time I try to step in and do my job, this leader is there to put me down or to narcissistically control me. And then you're considered the divisive one. You're considered the one who is the troublemaker, and then you're exiled, or worse, you're fired. These are the kinds of things that happen that seem little, but actually can deeply wound us into a place of never wanting to serve the church again, never wanting to subject our children to church people again. It could be as simple as you've been on the same team on the worship team or in the nursery or whatever, and then one day you're just not scheduled anymore. No clue why. You don't get any communication. I say communication is kindness. Communication is the greatest form of ministry. But these little things that happen, they're not so little in the moment because our identity is wrapped around them. Our security is wrapped around them. Our community is wrapped around them. And then suddenly we feel like we're losing everything. You think about that mom with the young girl who gets pregnant before marriage. Of course, we know it's not ideal, but how should the church handle that? We want people to live up to biblical expectations, absolutely, but all of us have fallen short. So what is our church's response to sin? What is our church's response to the hurting, the broken, the lost? And how are we communicating with each other that models Jesus and not corporate USA, in a church? So those are just like kind of 2 or 3 examples of how these hurts can fester into giant wounds that the enemy uses to make us bitter and offended, and then we don't want to go back to any church because we just have let that set in without going to the healer.
Yeah. Man, the house that Jesus built, all those examples, we're looking at Jesus, we're looking at how the gospel is an answer to every situation and every scenario. And sometimes we mess up as leaders. Sometimes we think we're doing what's best and we mess up and there's opportunities. One of the things I like with interviews is just to pull random phrases out of books and ask the author, like, explain this phrase. And the phrase I want you to break down for us is the wheel of favor. I really wanted to say it like Pat Sajak, like the wheel of favor, which I did. So explain that, describe that style of leadership in church today. Tell us more about that.
Well, social media has made church very difficult to do. If we're talking about doing church, social media has helped in some ways in that it gives us exposure, but it also sets expectations up for those coming in to serve, especially in more visible roles like teaching, preaching, worship, and male and female alike. We have our own nuances with that depending on your denomination and how you're used in the church. So my husband and I started calling it the wheel of favor because I was a worship leader. And, you would get called from the pastor or whoever, and they were super excited about you. Like, we've watched you on YouTube. We've watched you on social media. You're exactly what we want. You have everything that we absolutely need. Come on down, and you like move your family. You're like, I am the answer to this, which isn't the right, reason. But that's what they make you feel like. Like, I'm going in, I'm going to do all this work. We're going to shift culture and we're going to make CDs and albums, or maybe if it's a pastor, I'm going to bring people into salvation like never before because you are the answer. And you get there and you ride that wheel for a little bit. You're serving every week. You're on the platform every week. Everybody adores you. You can't do anything wrong until they realize they want something shinier. And here's what happens. Social media has us chasing this tail that doesn't exist. We're chasing the next best voice, the next best communicator, the next best social media, the next best whatever. And people become collateral damage on that wheel. And what you don't understand is the congregants are watching this wheel. They're watching the really good singer get up there and sing week after week. They're watching the communicator get up there and preach week after week. They're watching the new shiny object week after week. And then suddenly they just kind of start to disappear. And you realize that your position on that wheel of favor is starting to go down a little bit further, a little bit further. You're moved to a different campus. You're put into a different position. Nobody talks about it. It's like you chose it, but you didn't. And then all of these new shiny things are starting to come through. And what that does is it creates a culture of mistrust, not just amongst your staff, because then it makes them competitive. How can I stay on the top of that wheel as long as possible? Yeah. But now your congregation is confused. Like, why did we bring them if we weren't going to keep them? And what was it about them that you liked then that you don't like 6 months later? And what hurt me, and this is another source of hurt that we could talk about, is that I was the same person that they brought in. I hadn't changed. I was the same worship leader. I had the same voice. I had the same leadership skills. Nothing about me had changed, but their target of what they preferred changed. And we have to be really careful as leaders that our preferences don't hurt people. And that if our preference does change, well, I'd rather have a male leader or a female leader, whatever that is, to communicate with those who are riding that wheel to say, hey, when you came 6 months ago, you were exactly what we needed in that moment, but we're going to be making some shifts, and communicate that shift so that wheel doesn't feel like a punishment.
Yeah, that goes back to what you said, communication's kindness. And I think a lot of times in leadership, especially church leadership, I don't know why, but we're scared, or we don't want to hurt someone's feelings, and these are volunteers, and so our silence just we assume, oh, it's just going to take care of itself. Like, I'm just not going to say anything, and we're just going to make these shifts, or they'll be okay. But I think you challenge those leaders, like, those hard conversations, they're not fun, but they're powerful and necessary for us as leaders to lead our people with dignity, with honor, with humility. But a lot of times, I think there's on the flip side, there is intentional people who are leading in such a way that there is maliciousness to it. But I think for the leader listening, maybe it's like, wow, I didn't do it on purpose. I just didn't know how to talk about it,
I remember somebody asking me, when did your heart for ministry really come back? Like, what was it for you when you thought, okay, I can do this after seeing my parents get hurt or whatever? And it was interesting because I was a worship pastor at a church in Cincinnati, and I had to do auditions. I had to do worship auditions for vocals. And these sweet, innocent, naive, pure-hearted people are coming through one at a time. And it was like American Idol. It was so cutthroat. And I'm sitting there watching people worship their hearts out and being judged by how they're worshiping. And I didn't know how, as the new worship leader, I was supposed to communicate failure when worship is not, based off of performance, but, our hearts. And I had to have individual conversations with every person who wasn't going to make the team. And I went in kind of hard-nosed, like, I'm the leader. This is what they've called me to do. I just need to buck up and just tell them, sorry, don't call us. We'll call you, because as a leader, you're just thinking, I need to just rip the Band-Aid off and just get to leading the team that I'm supposed to be leading. And this young girl sits across from me, and her heart shattered in front of me. And I, for the first time at 34 years old, felt my heart break for what broke the heart of my father. I was so devastated to watch her weep in front of me over something she cared so much for, and somebody was telling her it wasn't good enough. And we sat in that office and just cried together. There wasn't a, like, I'm going to make it so you can be up here. I'm not going to, there was nothing I could do to make it better. I couldn't manipulate it. I couldn't do anything. All I could do was sit with her in that sorrow. And that changed me as a communicator, because I realized that if I can communicate compassion from the platform teaching about Jesus, I should be able to communicate compassion in letting somebody know they didn't make the worship team and still offer them that same Jesus. And I just ask for leaders to be the same person on the platform as you are behind closed doors when you're communicating with your staff and when you're communicating with your congregants.
Yeah, definitely. And, I love that when you talked about social media and sort of that picture that it paints of production, or these moments that we maybe think we're going to have when we walk into a church. The other thing that I think that it does is it kind of allows us to feel like we're connected to communities. And so it's easy to stay home, or I'll just watch a sermon, on the plane when I'm traveling, and I don't really need to connect in. And I think, what you're saying, when you're sitting across from somebody in a church and you're communicating, and in the kindness of mutual communication and mutual honesty and vulnerability and that willingness, in different situations to go, okay, there's reconciliation that can be had here, and we're going to wade into that. And that's really hard to do if you're sitting on your couch, or you're sitting in some random place by yourself watching a communicator who may be an excellent preacher, or worship, which may be incredibly moving, but it's really hard to do those things if you're not willing to step back in. And that's what I love about Raised to Stay and about the house that Jesus built, is you're providing this framework for saying, okay, you may be in this place, you may have deconstructed, you may have wrestled, you may be really hurt, but you can come back in, and it's important to be in. We're called to be in, right? And you can come back in. And so for somebody who is maybe afraid to do that, like, what are some practical proofs? What are some things that reveal that a congregation is healthy, that it is a purpose-filled church? Like, you can step into that place. I know you talked about feeling safe, but what are some of those proofs that can help somebody step back in safely?
When we moved from Colorado to Kentucky last year, we grew up here, so we knew all kinds of churches. There was no church that we had not heard about that was not, And I still didn't know which one I could trust because there had been so much time that had passed. And so here's what I did. Number one, I found out where the people whose walk with the Lord I respected the most, I found out where they were going to church. Who were the people my age who had children or teens, who were lovers of Jesus, lovers of their community? Where were they going to church? And I started visiting. We just, as a family, we just started visiting. We went to some churches that we had grown up in and realized, like, yeah, this was great for us, but it's not going to be great for our kids. And then we'd go to another one and be like, well, this is great for our kids, but it's not going to work for us. And, you know, we had to go through kind of like this trial and error of actually going into the building with people. And we would go with people. Like, we didn't just go by ourselves. I would call my friends and say, hey, is there like a, you know, can we meet you there? If you have the capacity to do that, go and meet someone there. Or maybe even call up a friend who's going through a similar journey and say, I'm thinking about visiting this church. Would you want to come with me? And we had to do that for about 6 months when we first moved here. But what it was calling my mentors, calling people and saying, do you have any suggestions? Do you have any pastors that you would recommend? And that was really kind of the first start for me, was just getting kind of that seal of approval from people that I knew what healthy community was. It wasn't just what was the most popular, what was the most hyped, but where was their good roots? And so we have found a church here that we love. It's good for both our kids and for us. The second thing that I look for all the time is multicultural and multi-generational. Now, here's the thing about the multicultural is that if your city's not multicultural, you may not have a multicultural church. But a multi-generational church speaks to the fact that there is a Lois and a Eunice and a Paul and a Timothy, and you have this generational hierarchy of love that's coming from the 80-year-olds all the way down to the children. So I'm looking for multi-age. The third thing I'm looking for is if the church were to disappear, would the city miss them? And that's actually the question that our church asks itself, is if we were to disappear from Florence, Kentucky, would the city miss us? Not just as a big building on the hill, but would they miss what we do in the community? So I'm looking for, the outreach portion of this, Judea, Jerusalem, to the ends of the earth. Finally, I'm looking for biblical teaching. I don't care who you're voting for. I don't care what your favorite pop star is. I don't care what your sermon series is. I want to know if you know the Word of God and you're going to preach the Word of God, and I'm going to leave biblically informed.
That's right.
That's also what I'm looking for. And worship that is worship in spirit and in truth.
That's good.
So if you can go in and you can just say, hey, does it at least check 4 out of my 5 boxes? You're not being a consumer, you're being discerning. Consumer is the coffee's too cold, there's not padding in the pew, they sang too loud. That's being picky.
Yeah.
But if all of those spiritual fruits are being met, give it a try.
Yeah, that's so good. I mean, the easy practical tools for those, anybody really looking for, a new church. Now, you move to a new city, it's easy, but specifically for those who have experienced hurt, who want to get back in, those are easy proofs for us to look at and to go after. So Natalie, wrapping up our time here, thank you so much for being on the show. We are super excited about this book. Can you tell listeners where they can access not just this book, but just all your content?
Yeah, so our Raised to Stay community is thriving over on Instagram, just at Raised to Stay. We also have a public and private one on Facebook. You can look it up under Natalie Runion or Raised to Stay. The books are found everywhere, Barnes & Noble, Target, Amazon, Books A Million, all the Christian bookstores. What we're really wanting for this second book, though, is, I pushed hard as a first-time author to hit, bestseller list, and the Raised to Stay community took us to 5 bestseller lists, which told me that this was a message people were really wanting. My hope for the house that Jesus built isn't so much that we hit bestseller lists, though my publisher would kill me for saying that, but it's more that we get it into the hands of the ready builders, the people who are ready to start building and stop complaining and start being part of the solution, not the problem. So I'm really looking for pastors and leaders to buy bulk orders for this. It comes out September 3rd, and you will get a 6-week intensive course. That's a video course for free when you do that. So we're offering that to all pre-orders up until September 6th. So if you would do that, that would just be a huge help to get this message out where it needs to go.
Yeah. Well, Natalie, thank you so much for your time today. If you're listening, we have tons of great resources on empoweredhomes.org for marriage, parenting, personal growth, and we have a ton of leadership resources. So for the leaders, we hope you're blessed by Natalie, but go get the book. Go be part of the next generation that brings about change and focus everything we do on the gospel, because Jesus built it, right?
Right.
Yeah. Thank you, Natalie. Appreciate you.
Thank you.